Steam at 600 degrees will find the smallest mistake in a weld and turn it into a funeral faster than you can say digital transformation. It doesn't care about your MBA. It doesn't respond to synergy or optimization. It is a physical absolute, a force of nature we cage in pipes and vessels, and it demands respect. It demands experience. My name is Thomas Bukowski, but everyone at the plant called me Tommy Pipes. I'm 57 years old, and for 31 of those years, I was the chief boilermaker at the Cargill ammonia plant in Donaldsonville. I started there when I was 26, fresh out of the Army Corps of Engineers, with hands already calloused, and a belief that if you did your job right, you were an asset. An asset is something you protect. That was my first mistake. The biggest mistake they made wasn't firing me. It was assuming I'd go quietly. If you love stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down, and the sweet justice that comes when experience meets arrogance, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You're going to want to hear this. 2 days before the humiliation, I was 80 feet up on the catwalk of Reactor C, running my hand over a T-joint weld I'd personally supervised in 1998. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal, a perfume I knew better than my wife's. The vibration of the plant hummed up through the soles of my Red Wing boots, a living pulse. I could tell by the pitch of the whine from Turbine 7 that its primary bearing was about 5 weeks away from needing a replacement. I made a mental note. It wasn't a digital notification on a tablet. It was knowledge, earned over 11,315 days of walking these steel mazes. Down below, a figure in a crisp, dark suit moved through the facility. Sloan Harrington. He was 29 years old, with a freshly framed Columbia MBA on his office wall, and hands that had never held anything heavier than a latte. He pointed at things. He gestured. He never looked up. He was a tourist in a place I called home. The meeting was in his office. It was the old plant manager's space, but Sloan had gutted it. The solid oak desk that had been there since the plant opened in the 70s was gone, replaced by a slab of glass and chrome that looked like it would shatter if you set a wrench on it. The walls were stark white. The only personal touch was that MBA hanging right behind his head like a halo for the financially anointed. He didn't ask me to sit. Sloan was looking at his monitor, his fingers tapping a rhythm on his desk. He wore a Rolex that cost more than my first house. The air smelled of some expensive cologne, sharp and chemical, trying and failing to cover the plant's honest odor of industry. "Thomas," he began, not looking up. He never used my name before. It was always a curt nod, or nothing at all. Hearing him say it felt wrong, like a child wearing his father's shoes. He finally lifted his eyes. They were clear, confident, and completely empty of understanding. We're moving into a new paradigm here at Cargill. A full digital-first realignment of our operational and safety protocols. I said nothing. I'd heard the buzzwords in company-wide emails. They sounded like a foreign language designed to say nothing of substance. "Your tenure here has been significant," he continued, picking up a manila envelope from his desk. It was thick. "But we've found your department's resistance to adopting the new digital safety logging and predictive maintenance suites to be a significant bottleneck. Your methods are legacy, outdated. My methods were the reason this plant hadn't had a major incident in 3 decades. My methods were why the federal inspectors who came through once a year just shook my hand, drank our coffee, and signed the papers. My legacy was a perfect safety record." "I see," I said. The words were gravel in my throat. "We need a team that is agile, forward-thinking," he said, pushing the envelope across the glass desk. It slid to a stop in front of me. "This is your severance package. It's quite generous. 31 years is a long time, but your time here is over." A dead calm settled over me. It was the same feeling I got just before a pressure test. That moment of absolute stillness where every calculation had been made, and all that was left was the truth. My hands, usually steady enough to weld a half-inch seam blind, felt like they could crush rock. But I just stood there. "You'll need to turn in your badge and keycard at security on your way out," he added, his eyes already flicking back to his monitor. The dismissal was complete. I was no longer an object of his attention. I didn't touch the envelope. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my keycard and badge, number 004, issued in 1992, and placed it on the glass desk. The plastic made a soft, final click. "Good luck with that," I said. He glanced up, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "The door's right there." I turned and walked out. I didn't look back at the office. I didn't look back at the plant. I walked past my guys, the boilermakers and pipe fitters I'd trained, men whose kids' graduations I'd attended. They saw the look on my face and knew. No words were needed. I nodded once to my foreman, a good man named Dave, and kept walking. The security guard at the gate, a kid named Marcus, I'd known since he was born, couldn't meet my eyes as he took my badge. He just mumbled, "Sorry, Tommy." I got into my 2001 Ford F-250 Super Duty. The odometer read 342,117 miles. The engine turned over with a familiar diesel growl. The seat was molded to my shape. Every dent and scratch on that truck had a story, and most of those stories were tied to this plant. Late-night call-outs, emergency shutdowns, working 36-hour shifts to get a boiler back online. I had sacrificed family dinners, anniversaries, and my own health for this place. And it ended with a 29-year-old in an Armani suit telling me I was a bottleneck. Optimization. I'd spent 31 years building this, and now this kid was optimizing me. But what he hadn't realized was that some assets don't show up on a spreadsheet. Back in 1996, the plant went through a major regulatory overhaul. The EPA and ASME were coming down hard on the entire chemical industry. Our parent company brought in a team of lawyers and consultants to make sure we were compliant. I was a young foreman then, just 34, but I knew the guts of this plant better than anyone. The head of the legal team was a man named Gus Raskin. He was in his late 60s, sharp as a tack, and had a healthy distrust for corporate bureaucracy. He spent 2 weeks following me around, asking questions, not about profit margins or efficiency, but about failure points, about what kept me up at night. He wanted to know where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. One evening, we were in the old records room, a dusty basement filled with blueprints and maintenance logs going back to the plant's construction. Gus pulled out a thick federal code book. "Tommy," he said, his voice quiet. "You see this? Section 8, Division 1 of the ASME, Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code. It's the Bible. But there's this little provision in it, a grandfather clause for inspectors of record at facilities built before 1980. He explained it to me. To keep operating our high-pressure ammonia synthesis converters, vessels running well over 150 psi, the plant needed an on-site, named ASME Authorized Pressure Vessel Inspector to sign off on all repairs, modifications, and the annual recertification. The new rules required a team of certified third-party engineers, but under the grandfather clause, a facility could retain its operational certification if it maintained a single, continuously employed inspector of record who was on the books before the rule change. The company wants to designate the entire engineering department, Gus said, tapping the page. The lawyers love redundancy, but I told them that's a mistake. If you have 10 people who can sign, the signature becomes worthless. The responsibility is diffused. You want one guy, one throat to choke. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. I'm recommending you, and only you. Your name, Thomas Bukowski, will be on the state and federal filings as the sole authorized inspector for this facility under this provision. I remember feeling a weight settle on my shoulders. Gus, I'm a boilermaker, not an engineer with a dozen diplomas. You're the man who knows which welds are original and which were done in a hurry during the '87 shutdown. You know the metallurgy. That's better than any diploma," he said. He pulled out a Silver Cross pen from his coat pocket. "One day, Tommy, this signature," he tapped the pen on the document, "will be worth more to this company than the entire executive board. Don't ever forget that." He made me sign the paperwork right there. My name went into the official record. For the next 25 years, it was just a piece of my job. Every year, I'd inspect the vessels, review the ultrasonic thickness tests, and sign the forms. It was a formality, a ritual. The paperwork went into a file, and everyone forgot about it. Everyone but me. Sloan Harrington, with his digital-first paradigm, had never seen a paper file in his life. He probably thought the ASME was a software app. I didn't go straight home after being fired. I drove to the parish library. It was quiet, smelled of old paper and floor wax. I sat at a public computer and spent 2 hours confirming everything. I logged into the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality database. I searched the federal OSHA and ASME registries. There it was. Cargill Ammonia Plant, Donaldsonville, Louisiana. Authorized Inspector of Record, Thomas J. Bukowski. Certification tied to continuous employment, as per Grandfather Clause 96B. Status, active. Then I did another search. I looked for certified third-party inspection firms qualified for high-pressure ammonia synthesis vessels. There were only 3 in North America. Their calendars were booked solid, 6 to 8 months out. Getting an emergency certification would be a nightmare of logistics and would cost a fortune, assuming they could even get a team on site. The final piece of the puzzle was the plant's operating permit. I knew it was tied to the annual ASME recertification. The deadline was always the same, end of the fiscal quarter. That was in 14 days. If the new forms weren't signed and filed by then, the plant was legally required to begin a full shutdown of all pressure vessels exceeding 150 psi. That meant every major reactor and converter in the facility. A shutdown wasn't like turning off a light. It was a 3-day process of cooling, venting, and purging. A startup was even worse, a 5-day, multi-million-dollar ordeal. Every day the plant was down cost the company $1.6 million in lost production. Sloan Harrington had just fired the only man on the planet who could legally keep his plant running, and the clock was ticking. I drove home. My wife, Sarah, was in the garden. She saw my truck pull in at 3 in the afternoon and knew something was wrong. I never came home before sunset. She took one look at my face, wiped the dirt from her hands onto her jeans, and said, "What did they do?" "They let me go," I said. She didn't cry or yell. She just nodded, her jaw set. "Their loss. Dinner's at 6. I'm making your favorite." For 31 years, she'd lived with the phone calls in the middle of the night, the missed holidays, the constant worry that came with my job. She deserved a husband who was home for dinner. The next morning, I didn't get up at 4:30 a.m. I slept until 7. The sun was already up. It felt decadent, unnatural. I made coffee, sat on the back porch, and watched the birds. I didn't think about Turbine 7's bearing or the corrosion rate on the heat exchanger tubes. My mind was quiet. Around 10, I hooked up my 18-foot fishing boat to the back of the Ford. I loaded my tackle box, my rods, and a cooler with sandwiches and beer. I told Sarah I was going down to the bayou for a few days. She just smiled and kissed me. Catch a big one. I drove south, my work phone sitting on the passenger seat. As I crossed the parish line, I pulled over, picked up the phone, and powered it down. Then I took out the SIM card and broke it in half. I tossed the pieces into the sawgrass. It was a clean break. The first few days were a blur of peace. The slap of water against the hull, the cry of a gull, the satisfying pull of a redfish on the line. I thought about nothing but the tide, the bait, and the position of the sun. The plant, with its noise and its pressure and its arrogant new boss, felt like it was on another planet. I knew what was happening back there. I could play it out in my head like a movie. Day 3 after my termination, someone in accounting or HR would process my final paperwork. My name would be removed from the active employee list. This would trigger an automated notification to the state regulatory board. A flag would go up in some digital system. Day 5, an analyst at the DEQ, probably bored and overworked, would see the flag. Inspector of record for a major chemical facility terminated. They would cross-reference it with the upcoming certification deadline. They'd send a formal, legally worded email to the plant's compliance officer. Day 7. Panic would begin to set in. The compliance officer, a guy who usually just shuffled papers, would walk the email into Sloan Harrington's glass and chrome office. Sloan, high on his own authority, would dismiss it. "Find another inspector," he'd command. "Get it done. I'm busy optimizing." Day 9. The search for another inspector would hit a brick wall. They would call my old foreman, Dave. He'd tell them what I did, but he wouldn't know about the special certification. That detail was buried too deep. They would call a few local engineering firms who would laugh at them. "High-pressure ammonia? You need a specialty team for that. Call us back in 6 months." Day 11. Sloan would be getting angry calls from corporate headquarters in Minneapolis. A vice president, a man who actually understood the financial implications of a shutdown, would be screaming about quarterly reports and shareholder value. The word catastrophe would be used. Day 12. Desperation. Sloan would finally understand he couldn't bully or buy his way out of this. He would be looking at a $20 million shutdown, all because he fired a legacy employee. His career, so bright and shiny, would be circling the drain. He would start trying to call me. My old work number wouldn't work. He'd get my home number from HR. Sarah would answer. I was filleting a handsome-looking speckled trout on the tailgate of my truck when my personal cell phone, the one I kept for emergencies, finally rang. It was an unfamiliar number with a local area code. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again, and again. On the 4th try, I wiped my hands on a rag and answered. "Hello? Is this Thomas Bukowski?" The voice was tight, strained. All the smooth, corporate confidence was gone, replaced by the raw edge of panic. It was Sloan Harrington. "Who's asking?" I said, watching a pelican dive for its dinner. "It's Sloan Harrington, from the plant." He sounded like he was running a marathon. "Look, we need you to come back. There's some paperwork, a certification that needs your signature." "Paperwork?" I said, keeping my voice level, calm. "I don't work for you anymore, Mr. Harrington. You made that very clear. My time there is over." I used his own words. I wanted him to hear them. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, fast and shallow. "Listen, Bukowski, this is serious. The whole plant. We can't operate without this signature." "Sounds like a management problem," I said. I picked up my filleting knife and made a clean cut along the fish's backbone. "You're the manager. You manage it." "There's no one else," he finally blurted out, the dam of his composure breaking. "You're the only one on the damned license. We have less than 48 hours before we have to shut down." I smiled. It was a cold, satisfying thing. "Is that so?" "Name your price," he said, the words tumbling out. "We'll pay. Whatever you want. A consulting fee. Just come in and sign the damn papers." This was the moment. The culmination of 31 years of loyalty, repaid with disrespect. The fulfillment of a 25-year-old warning from a wise old lawyer. This wasn't about money. It was about respect. It was about the fundamental truth that knowledge earned through sweat and risk is more valuable than any degree printed on fancy paper. "I'm not a consultant you can hire, Mr. Harrington," I said slowly, deliberately. "I'm fishing, but I'll consider coming back, as an employee. on my terms. Anything, he whispered. The word was a surrender. Here are the terms, I said, my voice as hard as forged steel. First, I want the title of Director of Plant Safety and Operations. That comes with a salary of $350,000 a year, guaranteed for 5 years, contractually. I'm 57. That takes me to retirement. I heard a choked sound on the other end. His entire MBA-fueled brain was probably trying to calculate the cost, but I wasn't done. Second, you will draft a formal, written apology to my team, the Boilermakers and the pipe fitters. In it, you will state that their experience and dedication are the most valuable assets at the facility, and that your previous attempt at realignment was a grave error in judgment. You will sign it, and I will read it to them myself. Silence. I could picture him, his face pale, his perfect suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. Third, I said, delivering the final blow. I want your resignation, typed, signed, and dated. It will be on my new desk in my new office when I arrive. I will not sign a single form until I have that letter in my hand. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a full minute. I let it hang there. I could hear the distant sound of a ship's horn out on the Gulf. He was trapped. He knew it. His career was balanced on the point of a pin, and I was the one holding it. You can't be serious, he finally managed to say, his voice barely a squeak. Steam at 600 degrees is serious, Mr. Harrington, I replied. A multi-million-dollar shutdown is serious. I am dead serious. You have 1 hour to call me back and accept my terms. If you don't, my phone goes off, and you can explain to the board of directors in Minneapolis how your digital transformation transformed their quarterly profits into a crater. Your choice. I hung up. I finished filleting the trout, packed it neatly in ice, and washed my hands in the brackish water. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. There was no elation, just a profound sense of rightness. The world, for a moment, had balanced itself. My phone rang exactly 52 minutes later. It was him. I accept, he said. The words sounded like they were torn from his throat. I'll be there tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I said, and hung up before he could say another word. The next morning, I drove my F-250 through the main gate. The new security guard, a kid I didn't recognize, had my name on a list. He waved me through with a nervous look. I parked in the visitor spot right in front of the main office. I walked into the building. The air conditioning was a shock after the morning humidity. The receptionist looked up, her eyes wide. Word had clearly gotten around. I didn't stop. I walked straight to my old department. My crew was there. Dave, my foreman, saw me first. A slow grin spread across his face. The other men stopped what they were doing. The clatter of tools and machinery quieted. They just stood there, watching me. They were waiting. They knew something had happened. I walked past them, up the stairs to the executive offices. Sloan Harrington's door was open. He was standing by the window, looking out at the plant he had almost destroyed. He looked smaller, diminished. His Armani suit was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved. He turned as I entered. He didn't say a word. He just pointed to the glass desk. There were 3 documents laid out in a neat row. The first was a multi-page employment contract. I scanned it. Director of Plant Safety and Operations. Salary, $350,000. 5-year term. It was all there. The second was the letter of apology to my crew. The wording was weaselly, full of corporate speak, but the core message was there. The third was a single sheet of paper. His resignation, effective immediately. Signed in a shaky hand. I picked up the resignation letter first. I read it, folded it, and put it in my shirt pocket. Then, I picked up the apology. I'll handle this one, I said. I walked back down to the shop floor. The men were still gathered. I stood in the center of them, the concrete floor cool beneath my boots. The familiar smells of grease and metal filled the air. This was my place. These were my people. "I have something here from Mr. Harrington," I said, my voice echoing in the large space. I unfolded the letter and read it aloud. I didn't add any emotion. I just read the words. When I finished, I looked up. No one cheered. There was just a series of slow, deliberate nods. It was an acknowledgement, a restoration of order. I walked back to the office. Sloan was still standing by the window. I sat down at what was now my desk. The chair was uncomfortable, designed for posture, not for a man built like me. On the corner of the desk was a stack of regulatory forms, the ASME recertification documents. Next to it was a pen, a cheap plastic Bic. I pushed it aside, reached into my own pocket, and pulled out the Silver Cross pen Gus Raskin had given me all those years ago. It felt heavy and solid in my hand. I clicked it open. I signed the first form, Thomas J. Bukowski. The signature was firm, confident. I pushed the stack across the desk toward Sloan. "Get these filed," I said. It was an order. He took the papers, his hand trembling slightly. He turned to leave. "One more thing," I said. He stopped at the door. "Send someone from facilities up here. I want this glass desk gone. And call the archives. Find out what happened to the old oak one. I want it back." He just nodded and walked away. A few minutes later, I saw him cross the parking lot, get into his Tesla, and drive away. He didn't look back. The aftermath was quiet. The corporate office in Minneapolis never said a word to me. They just approved the contract. They knew what had happened. They knew how close they had come to a disaster of their own making. I was a problem that had solved itself, albeit an expensive one. My first act as director was to promote Dave to chief boilermaker. My second was to authorize a full, top-to-bottom equipment upgrade for his team, no questions asked. My third was to take down the framed MBA from the wall and put it in a dumpster. I replaced it with a large framed photo from the archives. It showed the original construction crew from 1974, standing on the unfinished framework of Reactor A. They were young, tough, covered in mud, and smiling. They were builders. I don't spend much time in the office. I'm usually out on the catwalks, on the shop floor. I still listen to the hum of the turbines. Turbine 7 got its new bearing, right on schedule. The plant runs smoother than it ever has. The young engineers, the ones who used to walk around with tablets, now walk around with me. They ask questions. They listen. They are learning that the most important data isn't always on a screen. I go home at 5 o'clock now, every night. Sarah and I have dinner together. We talk about the garden, about our grandkids. I'm home for anniversaries and birthdays. I found a balance I never thought was possible. Sometimes I take the silver pen out of my desk drawer. I look at it and think about Gus Raskin. Control isn't in the title on the door. It's not in the fancy suit or the expensive watch. It's in the contracts. It's in the knowledge they take for granted. It's in the fine print. They thought my experience was a legacy problem. They were wrong. It was their only real asset. They just didn't know how to read the balance sheet. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the story. Leave a comment, and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice served cold.